All right. I want to welcome everyone to decarbonized homes, healthier communities, beneficial electrification. Those are the things we're going to be talking about today. Very important topics. And just as a reminder, this is brought to you by the Green Home Institute. The Green Home Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the places we live. Today, I'll be your moderator. My name is Brett Little, and I am the program manager here. This course, like all of our courses, is approved for multiple continuing education units, as well as our own internal certified green home professional designation under the energy and health pillars, and AIA health, welfare, and safety, which may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. If you want to become a member, I don't have the mug with me, but we have a lot of mugs still left over, our membership mugs. We're sending them your way. Another cool thing is we've launched our full certified green home professional designation series. It's made up of our 7-part series, residential green building and remodeling, comparing the residential energy and green rating systems, as well as some additional work, some really cool books you might want to check out. So if you become a member, it's 100% free to go through that whole training. You can watch it all anytime you want on YouTube. It's all available, but to go through the training and to get the designation, it's free to become a member. So check that out. Check out our website. And before we get started, a huge thanks to our top tier sponsor, Rheem. If you didn't know, in 2021, they took home the gold for efficiency at the Edison Awards, which is pretty cool. What they basically have here is a system that's up to 400% energy efficiency. It's called a heat pump system. It takes air. It takes energy out of the air, like you can see in this display, pulls it in the top, uppers the upper intake. There's R410A refrigerant that takes that heat, puts it into a compressor, transfers into the tank, heats up you and your client's water, and then puts out water through the condensate line from there. Basically, that's how it works, and it's super energy efficient. I've got one. We know that they work well. Some other features of it is even the newer models are now up to, I believe, depending on how big you get it, 400% efficiency, 4 on the UEF rating, 5 operational settings, warranties, leak detection, in-home system automations, easy to use app with great feedback, such as leak detection, energy use tracking, and even operation setting. And again, these systems can come ducted or ductless. We actually see most of them ductless at this point, but you might have reasons you want to duct them. And on the bottom there, you can see they can be strung together to serve larger developments like multifamily housing floors. One cool thing that I use this is I have mine set up from 2 to 7 o'clock when I'm on peak high carbon use, high cost use. I have my system throttle back 20 degrees so it really doesn't run. So this is one way that basically utilities can use these systems as batteries in your own house, water-based batteries, to shift that load and heat up when we have lower carbon emissions and lower costs. It's one of the cool things, and I use it for that too, so you can check that out. So anyway, rheem.com, check out everything they have there. And then thanks to our second tier sponsor on this one, Rockwell. This is a real picture. It's one of our lead projects that I had a chance to go take a look at. And this is a fibrous insulation spun mineral wall rock on the exterior instead of rigid foam. Decent R values. It's going to have a permeable, so it lets water move in and out so it doesn't rot the building. This stuff can even be put below grade and on the slab as well. And they've got a lot of cool products coming to help do this. And they've got recycled content and, again, lowered embodied energy. So check them out over at rockwell.com. So I am super excited right now to hand it off to our speaker with the Rocky Mountain Institute, Ann. So always love working with RMI and connecting with folks almost weekly from RMI. So Ann, welcome, and please go ahead and take it away.
Thanks for having me, and welcome. Some quick logistics notes. I'm going to kick us off with an introduction about the work that I do, some opening remarks, and I'll take you on a deep dive about some of the work that I've done recently, what we're going to be talking about today, And finally, towards the later half of the hour, I'd love to have some discussion going with some Q&A. So please drop any questions that you might have into the Q&A box. So my name is Yuan. I am an associate with RMI's Carbon-Free Buildings team, where I work at the intersection of building electrification, health, and equity. And just a note that I will be using the terms electrification and decarbonization interchangeably and mostly take it to mean the removal of fossil fuels from the operating of buildings. So for space heating, for water heating, for cooking, and instead of, and less so about the removal of carbon in the constructions and materials process, which is sometimes what it's taken to mean. So I currently explore the co-benefits, sometimes known as non-energy benefits, of whole home retrofit packages, particularly for frontline and environmental justice communities. Specifically, I support our state and local level efforts with a focus on New York, and am particularly interested in how public and affordable housing programs can lead the market to decarbonization. So my team at RMI has increasingly been finding that a health-focused narrative, which makes salient the health impacts, but also the benefits of electrification, has been resonating with many advocates, policymakers, and key decision makers as we try to remove fossil fuels from our buildings. Together with my co-author Bomi Zhang, we synthesized research and analysis on the impacts of different building level interventions in the context of communities that face disproportionate economic, health, and social burdens, of which you will be learning more about today. To this, I wanted to take a quick second to run a little poll to capture some of the understanding that we have in this group about, comfort with health type discussions. So if you could take a quick second to fill this out. Thanks, Brett.
We'll give it 2, 3, 2, 1. All right. Can you see that?
All right, so I see that we're trending somewhere in the lower to moderate realm with regards to, health benefits of building decarb, which is great. That's why we're here. So let's get thinking about what we would like to take away from today. So some takeaways that I hope that you might have from today's session, would be to learn more about how we have been framing health in the context of building decarb efforts. I'd like you to get more comfortable discussing the health impacts and benefits as we transition away from fossil fuels in our buildings. And I'd like for you to be able to get thinking also about more intersectional action that considers health, equity, climate, and of course, buildings. So as we embarked on the work that we do, a key question that we asked repeatedly, was how can we be maximizing the health benefits of building decarbonization, particularly for communities that bear, the heaviest health burdens of a fossil-fueled world. And we approached this learning with the thinking of wanting to understand health as a truly cross-cutting reality. It comes from an understanding that everything we do has health implications, but to really dig into that, how do we also ensure that our work of decarbonizing buildings centers climate justice as well? And this comes from a recognition that we have been doing energy work for many years now. And there's so much work going on that is mission aligned, and yet we are still feeling like there are still some things that are just not connecting. And this is an opportunity to move forward in a substantive way. And there needs to be greater connection between professional spheres that tend to be more independent of each other. And so we know that we must decarbonize buildings and that we must do so quickly, but how do we make decisions that can maximize the health benefits, particularly for communities that bear some of the heaviest burdens? For some context, it's important to understand that some of the cost burdens that certain households face, because finances are so central to many other things that happen. And I see that we have some participants not from the US, and I do want to preface that this is some statistics from the US. But so the underlying truth of this is that for so many families here, the level of housing cost burden is unprecedented. And this housing cost burden that I'm talking about comprises of more than just rental costs burden. Evidently the housing stock is also in a state of disrepair and needs a lot of investments, as you may expect. So as we dug deep into how the needs break down, you might expect that there is a correlation between low-income families occupying homes that have more dire needs. Not only do 2 in 3 homes have substantial quality issues such as mold and structural issues, but they are also lacking essential components like working kitchens. And so housing quality is really a fundamental issue here. Finally, we're also looking at a built environment that is heavily dependent on fossil fuels. And this is especially true in the cold climates like in the Northeast and Midwest. Our analysis found that due to a variety of factors, the undeniable truth is that low-income families in the US tend to be overrepresented in terms of residing in buildings that still run on fossil fuels. And so when you look at the health literature of the impacts of fossil fuels in communities, what we end up finding is that some of these health impacts are some of the most inequitably distributed impacts. So at a high level, some of the key messages that we'd like to see weave its way into the kind of mainstream narrative is that when we talk about electrification, is that it be part of a package that also addresses housing quality and housing cost burden. More than just how we are switching away fuels from fossil to renewable, but really how are we making sure that these decisions don't have other unintended consequences? For example, in areas where electricity prices are higher than gas prices, or if tenants don't pay for certain bills already, electrification might create added financial burden on families that are already experiencing things like energy insecurity. And then the second message is that health benefits of such a holistic integrated approach, if you will, to low-income communities are plenty. And this comes from a robust landscape of health research that has already identified the ways in which housing quality is integral to health. And finally, in the US, that state and local governments are in the position to lead action on this today. It's fantastic to see movement at the federal level, but we also have a great opportunity at a more local level, whether it's through codes or other rulemaking procedures, to really have a significant impact on how housing gets built. And these agencies can move independently, even of the federal government, and this is a lever that cannot be overlooked. So there are ways in which electrification can have benefits beyond just those from the utility system, which is where the term beneficial electrification has historically been applied to. We believe that we can be looking at electrification not only in terms of greenhouse gas impacts or to have a well-functioning grid, but we can be making this approach applicable to not just housing and energy folks, but even public health folks, because we want impacts such as lowered housing cost burdens, improved housing quality, with an emphasis on healthy indoor environments, as well as greenhouse gas reductions and improving how buildings interact with the grid. The framework that we used in thinking through this holistic intervention package centers around systems thinking and how buildings our systems, with all parts impacting the performance of other parts in various ways. We're talking about envelope improvements, electrification of appliances and equipment, ventilation and compartmentalization, as well as grid services, as part of this package. And there is, a little bit more detail in this slide, but I know that everybody should have access to this through the handout materials. So I'm gonna not dive too deep into that. So when I first started talking, I mentioned, fostering some common ground between many disparate professional spheres, and the need to be on more of a same page. So, we all know like the sheer challenge of moving as fast as we can on climate action, but also doing it in a way that does not maintain systemic injustices into the future is something that we all need to be working together on. So hopefully some of the findings of our work can contribute to a shared language and interconnection amongst these issues. And, these are some, I guess, parts of the world that we have identified, that this report might be able to speak to. And so we have organized the learnings into three main parts. In the first part, we synthesize existing research and analysis on various building level interventions to really understand how work at each level may impact the health of both residents and their communities. The second part is an effort to contextualize and understand how communities can face disproportionate economic, health, and social burdens because of a multitude of factors. Finally, we put together some recommendations for state and local actors to further this work. The mechanisms through which beneficial electrification can deliver health improvements are many. We can see things from, indoor air and environmental quality improving to safer indoor temperatures during extreme heat and cold, as well as increased energy security. The undesirability of introducing combustion-related pollutants into the home has long been acknowledged in health literature. And pollutants from fossil fuel combustion are linked to a variety of adverse health impacts. In the table on the right, we have really tried to demonstrate the extent of these adverse health impacts that you may see from both short-term and long-term exposure to these pollutants. And our synthesis of several health and housing interventional studies show that removing fossil fuel burning equipment and appliances in the home is effective as a pollution source control measure. So doing so would immediately reduce the risk of health harms such as decreased lung function, asthma incidence, brain damage, heart failure, cardiovascular disease, amongst many others. Studies also show that a combination of a high performance envelope with compartmentalization and enhanced ventilation showed really positive effects on indoor environmental quality. Well-sealed envelopes and compartmentalization helps reduce pest infestations and the moisture conditions that often lead to mold. It also prevents the infiltration of potentially polluted outside air. Additionally, research has found that high performance envelopes have the added benefit of providing increased hours of safety, which is the maintenance of safe indoor temperatures during hot or cold weather. So in this graph, RMI analysis compared a passive house standard building envelope to a code compliant new building using the parameters of a power outage in a cold snap. We found that the passive house was actually able to maintain safe indoor temperatures 4 days longer than the code building. In our exploration, we also document the benefits of adopting all electric equipment and appliances and how this may increase access to air conditioning, and from that, the ability to mitigate the deadly effects of extreme heat events. So high performance envelopes can contribute to more efficient cooling and safer indoor temperatures, but modeling has also shown that they cannot fully mitigate the effects of heat buildup in the absence of air conditioning when overnight temperatures stay high, such as, during a heat wave. And so RMI did some modeling of different cooling technology using the parameters of a heat wave this past summer in Seattle. And we found that heat pumps are the most climate aligned cooling technology while also being superior at maintaining a comfortable and safe indoor air temperature. I think something that we're also seeing is that the bonus of adopting all electric equipment and appliances in the home means that we can cook without open flames, with using electric induction stoves. And this can help us avoid heating up of our spaces while cooking, which means that we just spend also less effort trying to cool our spaces down while keeping our energy consumption and costs down. The evidence that we're seeing also strongly suggests that removing in-building combustion can have a positive impact on what goes on outside of our buildings. Combustion equipment in our homes, such as boilers, furnaces, hot water heaters, are vented to the outside. And so the removal of this will contribute to better outdoor and neighborhood air quality. And we would also be reducing the demand on what is inherently aging, leaky, and risky gas distribution infrastructure. We are also realizing that leaking supply lines and equipment in buildings are contributing to fugitive methane levels much higher than expected in many cities. A statistic that I found particularly compelling was the result of a recent Harvard study that found that about 15 to 20,000 premature deaths every year are due to outdoor PM 2.5 air pollution that results from burning fuels in residential buildings, which is equivalent to a national annual health burden of approximately 160 to 220 billion dollars. That's pretty shocking. And finally, the combination of electrification and high efficiency, climate appropriate, smart technology gives us the opportunity to increase the affordability and reliability of energy access, which is an important driver of health inequity. The reliability and affordability of energy access has a very important impact on health. When households and families are unable to adequately meet their basic household energy needs, also known as energy insecurity, a wide range of health issues can occur, such as stress and mental health, to poor sleep and cardiovascular and respiratory health. Direct health harms such as carbon monoxide poisoning, temperature-related illness, and even death can occur when residents resort to alternative energy sources to meet their needs when conventional methods fail them. So moving on to part 2 of our learnings, we identify how communities can face disproportionate economic, health, and social burdens, and why we need to center these circumstances as we make moves on decarbonizing our building stock. So evidence shows that low-income communities repeatedly face stressors on multiple levels, and they experience both heightened vulnerability and exposure in comparison to more affluent populations. And some of the vulnerabilities that we have identified include systemic racism, marginalization and discrimination, limited access to resources, and the resulting trade-offs, as well as poor neighborhood and household conditions. These communities also must grapple with heightened exposure to location-based pollutants, whether it's because of their closer proximity to polluting sources such as power plants, highways, Superfund sites, climate risks, so exposure to extreme heat, flood zones, and in-home pollutants and allergens. What we're seeing in the health research indicate that about 60% of the burden of heart disease is directly attributable to living in poverty and its associated risk. We also learned that children under the age of 6 who live in homes that use a gas stove or oven for supplemental heat are 80% more likely to have asthma than children in homes that do not. And in the US, summer temperature differences between redlined and non-red line neighborhoods can have, almost a 20-degree Fahrenheit difference in temperatures. And 70% of people living below the poverty line also have significantly higher exposure to surface urban heat than those above the poverty line. The combination of all these factors and disparities serves as sort of a magnifying glass for any impact, whether it's good or bad. For example, when the New York City mayor's office modeled the health and air quality benefits of electrifying its buildings, asthma emergency room visits were reduced by 10 times more in lower income communities as compared to more affluent communities, even though the reduction in pollution was similar. The fact is, the circumstances that these communities face are immensely different, and we have to take that into account when designing policies. So we made some recommendations for action at the state and local level. This is a multifaceted challenge, but that also means that there are opportunities to have a positive influence in many ways. We have 4 broad categories of recommendations, and I'm going to skim over what we've highlighted for some of them. So the first being, we should be creating an empowering or enabling policy framework to make space for the agency of low-income communities. The second category is to use regulated housing, or what we traditionally call affordable housing, to build market capacity, to move the market for everyone involved. And yes, especially for low-income folks, but also for the market at large. When affordable housing builders and developers are asking for and implementing techniques and technologies, such as building to passive house standards, this knowledge and expertise can and will be diffused and implemented throughout the rest of the housing market. So it's a great opportunity that we have to be thinking about. Codes and standards are also an area where state and local government have so much ability to make a difference. And finally, is really just the matter of how much resources that are available to such a cause. And, what are some ways that these resources can be made available to those that can benefit? I am going to pause there, and this is my contact information if anybody wanted to discuss this offline a little bit more, if you had any questions. But I know that we have some questions here. I have not been keeping my eye on the box, but let's discuss.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Anne. Looks like we've got plenty of time for some conversation around some of these important issues and topics and concerns that you brought up. We got a couple of questions coming in. I've got a few questions myself, and one question here that came in, and I'm really glad it did, and I seconded and want to kind of add to it, from what I've seen out there, and that is, as we go out and recommend and encourage and assist and consult people to shift towards electrification, especially those folks who are in cold weather climates like where I'm at, and especially those folks who are on expensive electric utility grids like where I'm at. I've got, I check all the boxes as far as how this is going to be difficult. We have a lot of communities and many other communities where I don't live, where they have these, like New York, where I assume you do work too, low gas rates right now, which we know are subsidized and potentially temporary, and high electric rates. And so is there a moral or ethical dilemma here where we would be going out and, on one hand, you've made a good pitch about electrification and the health benefits, which is a huge intangible, what could it mean to be proactive and prevent some of these health issues? And sometimes health has no dollar value, right? I mean, can you place a dollar value on a kid getting asthma? I don't know. someone might try, but the hospital sure can. But anyway, but on the flip side, we might be putting people in situations, and we say this all the time, like, what if we had our wish list, right? We had the subsidies in place, we could pay for full electrification upgrades, we could give them air source heat pumps, and all the stars align. But even still, after that, we know that their bills are going to go up in many cases because of these crazy rates right now. So what do you say in those cases where there might be a moral dilemma here, encouraging people in these income restricted situations to electrify, when we might, cause them further economic harm?
Mhm. I hear you. And, I'm in New York where, electricity bills are and electric rates are higher than gas rates. And it's something that is at the forefront of this discussion. Yeah, we recognize, the health benefits, very salient, there's no doubt about that.
Hmm.
But like, how do we actually make it a reality? And I think the first thing that, I want to start people thinking about is that perhaps maybe it's not so much that there is an absolute increase in cost, but that the costs look different. So yes, if we're just looking at, heating bills, gas bills versus electric bills, of course your electric bill is going to be looking a little higher because your appliances in your home use electricity now. But, we're not thinking about, the ER room visits that you have to pay for, the cost of health insurance, and, the other additional life costs that comes with living, with fossil fuels so deep embedded into our environment that we live with. So I think it's this idea of thinking that our costs will just look different, not necessarily that it's just straight, more. But then also to that, which is why we're also advocating for not just a swap out of fossil fuel appliances to electric, because if we just did that, we didn't think about anything else, of course, there's going to be a really huge impact. And, especially for residents who don't typically pay for, certain bills. So like if they don't pay for heating, if you switch over to, electric appliances, that cost burden then gets transferred to their residents. And so, I think that is one of the biggest challenges that comes with electrification and all of its bells and whistles, is figuring out how do we make sure not to transfer this burden onto ones that, cannot afford to have this burden. And to that, efficiency is incredibly important. Having a really well sealed envelope, we need to be thinking about other ways that we can be reducing energy consumption, past utility allowances and incentives that should be coming with all of these upgrades. And so, like, I find, like, yes, when I talk about it, it is just building electrification, but I want to, really emphasize that it's not just a swap out of fuels. If we were to just talk about fuel switching, that can be very dangerous, very expensive, I get it. And I personally, if my apartment that I live in right now had that, I would be also facing, incredibly crazy utility bills. And, that's why we're pushing for this package. It's a whole home intervention that, hopefully can take care of a lot of the things where, even though, yes, now your appliances are all electric, but also they're also incredibly efficient now, and they're smart, they can, whether it's figuring out time of use rates that are equitable and, just in straight generally just using less electricity because you have very, very efficient equipment, but also your home is very well insulated. And so you don't even need to have this active heating or cooling. So it has to come as a package. If we look at it in a vacuum, fuel switching can have very disastrous consequences on residents. But that's why we're not trying to do that. And there's so much more that we need to be doing.
Great. Well, thank you. And to be sure, you're not saying you're trying to fuel switch in a vacuum in and of itself, right? But you do want to fuel switch. And I think that gets me into my next kind of question, and the question here about, obviously we don't want to go through the whole list of incentives that exist out there, but just maybe some examples, because on the fuel switching end, like, and specifically where I'm at, and I suspect other places around the country have this issue, we have a bit of a perverse incentive, right? So if I'm in an income restricted situation, or even a, not in one, I need a new heating and cooling system, I can get a rebate for a new gas water heater, but I cannot get that same rebate or anything close to it or at all if I decide to do the right thing and switch to a heat pump water heater, help my client switch to one. So to some extent, and then the utilities, point back and say, well, I don't serve gas in that area, so I can't get the carbon reduction. Go look at our service commission, and it's like that finger pointing game. And then also just, I look at like our weatherization action agencies that are deployed across the country who have the money to do these things you're talking about, right? They have the funds and the resources to do it, but they're not looking for these fuel switching opportunities either. They're just putting in the same old stuff. That's because their federal government calculator tells them to do it, right? And they just know it. So with those big barriers, have you seen anyone knocking them down or overcoming them? Any good examples of that?
Yeah, I think that people are beginning. We are in the process of, understanding what these barriers are. And I think one thing you mentioned is about this fuel switching problem, especially with regards to, how utilities fund that. Are there loopholes that they can find where they don't have to pay? And we are actively trying to address that. So there's such thing called the 100-foot rule, where a utility is responsible for, a radius of 100 feet, and they cover all of, that fossil fuel infrastructure costs. And things like that, exacerbate this infrastructure that we're trying to get rid of. And one of the things would be to just remove these barriers. And then there's this other thing where, you could be improving the efficiency of your gas appliance, and the utility pays for that or incentivizes that, but then it doesn't incentivize to swap over to this electric or a different fuel. And I think that's where it comes into play, that there are these fuel switching barriers that we need to also be addressing. And I think another thing goes back to this idea of, maybe expanding our understanding of how costs present themselves, but also expanding our definition of how certain funds are being used. So an example that comes from, at the top of my mind, local law 55 in New York City is an asthma-free housing law, which, mandates that landlords and building owners have to, make sure that their residences are free of mold, are free of pests, are free of, cockroach allergens and all of that stuff. But it does not include, gas combustion. And it's been shown that the presence and use of gas stoves in our homes has a negative impact on our indoor air quality, and resulting, asthma incidents in children and adults. And so, that is, a little example, but how can we be expanding, our definition to include some of these things that we're talking about, so that we can have, better access to some of these funds, like health and safety improvements? Should we also be including, electrical upgrades? And should we also be including like the swap out of gas stoves to induction stoves as part of that health and safety, conversation? Or how can we be using health insurance type money? And, this was a very, one of my discussions with somebody, they were like, yeah, how can we get doctors to prescribe an induction stove if, they're working with a patient who has chronic asthma? Because ultimately we are, treating for symptoms. When you go into the ER for like an asthma attack, they give you an inhaler, whatever. But then you still end up going home and you're still in an environment that is harmful for your health. How can we be changing that? And, I think that there are many people with a vested interest, and we need to be empowering these people and empowering these resources, so that we can access that, for a cause that benefits everybody on many, many levels.
Yeah, I'm really I'm really glad you brought up that last point, because I almost look at, you sort of got the utility providers who sort of either are reactive or proactive, right? They're prescribing energy efficiency to help people, especially on the income restricted side, avoid these higher utility bills. And inherently they're getting pulled into the health game, and some are responsive to that, and they're like, hey, I understand some of these healthier things are more energy efficient, like, you know, Energy Star bath fans or whatever it may be. But yeah, at the end of the day, in their defense, it's not their job, right, to alleviate health burdens, right? And so you're right. I mean, how cool would it be if our healthcare providers were especially more proactive? But even on the other end, yeah, like, are they doing screening questions? Are they sending out home assessors to evaluate your home, much like we would do with accessibility? If you had an accessibility challenge,
Mhm.
they might send someone out through, I believe, healthcare funds to say, hey, we can help you get around better in your house through these modifications.
Mhm.
Why aren't we sending out people to, test bath fans and ventilation systems and gas leaks and PM 2.5, much in the same way, to prescribe these issues? So I'm really, I've been thinking about this too, and I'm glad you brought it up and that we're, talking about it. I think it's really important to continue to push our healthcare industry to do better and be more proactive. Um,
Yeah.
I I
And
I
I
want.
think
Oh, go
like,
ahead. Yeah.
yeah, and I think, it's not necessarily like, yes, in some ways, this is something
Mm,
that is novel,
mm,
like climate action, has really only started really gaining the kind of momentum we're seeing now, like in the past few years. But I think if we're, maybe
mm,
changing our search terms a little bit and we're thinking about healthy housing, if we look back, there's the movement on asbestos, there's
mm,
lead, there's, smoke-free housing, there's mold kind of interventions. And there has been a lot of success in eradicating that from our housing. And,
mm,
what are some learnings from those opportunities that we can take and apply in this context? And, I think if we use lead,
mm,
there's both an enforcement side where, it's written into code, it's written into local law, but then there's the other side where, advocates can push for more incentives, more allowances, different ways of housing inspection. And like I said, I think there's opportunities from
mm,
everywhere, and we absolutely need to be
mm.
taking advantage of everything that we've got.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I want to, well, first of all, and I wanted to speak to the specific questions because I know everyone always wants to know about incentives. And um, I do know that here in Michigan, and I hats off to our utility provider, Consumers Energy, on the renovation side for folks in propane low income situations. They're basically allowing you to add heat pumps, cold weather heat pumps, in addition to the propane system, as well as, perform weatherization, and they fund a majority of that. So we're very thankful for that. We'd like to see other utilities copy that. And then also in some of their dual fuel cities where they have both gas and electric, I have been hearing rumors that people are getting paid in low income situations to switch out the gas water heater to electric heat pump, for example, and get the rebate for it, which is rare. And then also both of our big utilities in our state have all electric new home construction with energy efficiency built in, and they like double the rebates to, I mean, you're talking almost $20,000 for this on the low income side. So we're going to have some more on that from Habitat for Humanity Kent County. Really cool stuff that's going on. But anyway, I just wanted to also, bring up some more specifics to our Michigan friends out there. So there's a lot of conversation coming in, a lot of great conversation. I want to talk, while we have you here, briefly about, action, taking action. We have to take, we know, I mean, this, and RMI knows this. I sit on, I don't know how many calls where RMI individuals are on, and we're talking about taking policy actions and driving policy at all levels, city, state, federal, county based. What can people do? Where can they get involved? And what do they need to be looking for if they want to take these actions? And especially, I think where this really was stemming from too in the conversation was on the rental side, because
Mhm.
people are genuinely concerned that, you know, first of all, in many cases, you can't change anything in your rental. And even if you can, why do that? And then you leave and you're out a lot of money, right? If you put in an induction stove, it's probably stuck there, right? And so it doesn't benefit you. So, maybe you have some ideas on how to talk to your landlord, and I always want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But how do we, encourage landlords from the top down to make these changes and, work on these things from a policy level?
So, I mean, this rental thing and, not feeling empowered, like you can make the best decisions for yourself, and the climate and your health is something that is very personal to me. I am renting my place in New York. I, have tried talking to my landlord about like, hey, can we replace my stove? And he tells me, I literally just gave you a brand new stove. It's like one of the best gas stoves ever. Even my wife wants it. Like, what do you want me to do about that? And then there's the other thing of, my building, our electricity supply, like the lines will not be able to support me just putting in a whole induction stove. So then there's that problem. And so if I wanted to choose to just swap that one stove out, assuming that I was able to, that would entail, changes for the entire building that, obviously the building owner is not going to do unless they absolutely have to. And so I think on many levels, it's understanding that people do not move or make any movement unless it's more uncomfortable if they were to do nothing. And so we need to be finding ways to make it uncomfortable to have any inaction. And, it's very easy. And I feel this, maybe Brett, you feel this, like the weight of climate change is never ending and it's oppressive. But there are many ways that, us as individuals can be involved. And whether that is finding something that speaks to you. So if health is something that really resonates with you, finding out how you can, educate yourself more, empower yourself with more knowledge, and then finding avenues to get involved in many ways. So, there are the policymakers and the advocates who are pushing for change at, I would say like a higher level, at the policy level, at the code level, enforcement, that maybe individuals don't feel very connected to, and is like a very crazy process that is very hard for the layperson to get involved. But hey, I have asthma. I'm really interested in how to make sure that either gets alleviated or, doesn't get exacerbated. And there is a hearing coming up, and, there's an opportunity for me to make a public comment. And for those who, maybe are not as comfortable with the public comment process on legislation and stuff like that, starting small, telling a personal story. We went through a process with the California Energy Commission, where we actually very successfully managed to organize a whole bunch of health professionals, but also mothers who were caring about their own child's asthma, cancer survivors, lung cancer survivors, and also just general public who were interested in breathing better air. And they, made testimony, they wrote in for their public comment, and there was a wide range of stories of like, I breathe this in my home, to I noticed that my neighborhood actually has this condition and I don't like it and I want something done about this, and this is something that I care about. And so I think just starting small, if it feels too intimidating, is always a key. Like something is always better than nothing. And finding something that you care about and making it known that you care about this thing, so that the people who are making decisions can't just be, doing nothing. If we make it known that this is something that people care about and there is a big majority of it, or the voices are very loud, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you for sharing that and bringing that up, and obviously sharing your own personal stories that are, I think, helpful, and maybe hopefully people can think through like how this can connect with what they're doing or others they're talking with. Just getting into some really specific questions and clarifications here. I wanted to bring up this some of the studies you had mentioned. I want to make sure I heard them right. So something about, PM 2.5 being given off from combustion and burning in buildings. But I'm curious if that actually is specific to like rural areas with wood burning stoves, or is that truly PM 2.5 levels rising in areas from combusting natural gas and like a hot, furnaces in homes? Yeah.
If we look into the data, it includes everything. So
Okay.
it includes wood burning as well.
Well, sure, yeah, and I know that. It's the gas one. I guess I assumed it wasn't a big issue. So yeah.
Burning gas does create PM 2.5.
Well, yeah, and I just meant to say I thought once it goes through your stack and out, it's like it didn't compress on like an urban area. You know what I mean? But if it does, that's interesting. So
yeah, I think the numbers
Mhm.
that I used are only just for gas. And so if you considered, wood burning stoves, I think those numbers are a lot higher.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so yeah, I just wanted to clarify. And then the other one was the asthma stove piece. And I've always sort of heard that. So again, younger children, we know that when there's gas stoves, there's higher chances of asthma. But I think there was a key term you used that might have changed what I misunderstood, and that is when it's used for heating. Can you clarify that one real quick?
Yes. So there's two parts, and I didn't mention, that first fact that, gas stoves, combustion, pollutants, and then childhood asthma. Because for the purposes of this paper, we, had the parameters of income and using low income, to look at, some of those differences. And yes, there has been, this relationship between gas stoves and childhood asthma. But on top of that, the other nuance is that in comparing families or homes with children with gas stoves, but then also families that use their gas stoves and ovens for supplemental heat. Those that use their stoves and ovens for supplemental heat have a higher incidence of childhood asthma, which makes sense because that just means that we're burning, the gas for a longer period of time because we need to use it for heating.
Right. You had mentioned something earlier that stuck out. I see like a comment. And it reminds me of some conversations I've been having with our friends at Elevate here. And that is, you were talking about the building specifically and the electrical, systems and it being able to handle it. But taking it one step further, I've heard actually whole communities might not be able to electrify because of a bad grid there. Are you able to speak to that briefly at all? Are you familiar with that?
What aspect of that? Like, how do we?
It's pretty similar to what you said at a building level, but take it to a neighborhood scale level, like, right? So like, let's say someone on this block of like 50 homes, if they all electrified, it would take the grid down. Like because we know it's not going to happen overnight, but the problem is it happens more and more. The utility company would say, hey, we can't handle this much load here in this particular community because it's such an older grid. Have you heard of that before? And a lot of these are lower income communities and communities of color, unfortunately. So
absolutely. And I think, there's this question of, is the grid reliable? Is it even able to handle that capacity? But also like on the climate front, there's this other question of, if the grid is not exactly 100% green yet, this added capacity on, what could be dirty energy could actually increase our climate emissions, right? So actually seems kind of counterintuitive. But I think to that, it's really the same understanding at the household level, but also at the community level, is that we need to be thinking about grid services. So like time of use, demand response, as well as like high efficiency and just like in general, other ways that we are reducing our energy consumption. What applies at the household level applies to the neighborhood level as well, because a neighborhood is just an amalgamation of all of these separate households. So I think the same response stands in that, we're not just fuel switching, like there are many other things that we have to be thinking about. And it's both at the household level, it's both at the building level, but also at the utilities level, where we have to use time of use or, like demand response, smart technology, and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What can you speak to about those who are just directly going to the affordable housing agencies in the community, whoever they may be, their local nonprofits, or maybe going to volunteer at a habitat and just trying to work with them to think through different processes? I guess, do you have any recommendations for them on how to promote and encourage and bring up the conversation of electrification?
Yeah, I think this is something that we think about a lot because specifically for affordable housing, right? Like the margins are so tight, and why should they care about this if they don't have to care? And I think it's about finding out ways to make them care. It does matter if you can see that the state is starting to regulate that, or starting to mandate affordable housing to comply with some of their climate regulation, whether it's in the matter of like small little prescriptive action that they can take. I think making it aware that is this existing as they always have been is not feasible anymore, and that we need to be thinking about ways of getting ahead of that. But I also think that, money speaks, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, if there were all the resources in the world, all of the support in the world available for these developers and owners, it makes it harder for them to, stick to inaction. And to that, I know that there are a lot of colleagues of mine and a lot of people in the space who are working on things like the low income housing tax credit and making sure that that whole system is friendly to, whole home retrofits and upgrades the way that I've spoken about. And just making sure that these building owners are aware of these resources, aware of these opportunities to get more money. And, they're going to have to be making improvements, whether it's to their boilers and heating systems or their windows or something. And so that money is going to be coming from somewhere. If they're applying for more money under the tax credit system, it's good to know that, oh, okay, if something is being built to passive house standards, they're going to be eligible for more funding. And one of my friends in, I want to say, Pennsylvania, shared that, they had a test project where the LIHTC funding actually drew more passive house applications because there was this caveat that, you get extra points for building to these standards. And so I think making sure that, these resources are known, sometimes I guess maybe the marketing of these, energy agencies or finance agencies are not the best. Making sure that they're known, they're accessible, understandable, and that, the people making the decisions at the building level have access to them and feel empowered to make use of them.
Yeah. We are at actually our time right now. So briefly, just real quick, I just want to remind everyone, for those of you looking for your continuing education, watching this in the future, not right now, on demand, make sure to take that 10-question quiz with an 80% passing rate. You can find that on the USGBC channel, on our Thinkific platform, or wherever you might be watching this. And just a reminder, for those of you watching this live, check your spam at certs@gutenbergcerts.com, and you will receive your certificate here shortly for your approval. And before we wrap up, a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, our executive director, Jose Reina, and all of our volunteer speakers who allow us to do what we do, especially our top tier sponsors who are going to help our clients electrify: Mitsubishi, Rheem, build Equinox for smart ventilation, April Air for a healthier indoor air quality. Huge thanks to all of them for allowing us to do what we do. Yuan, I guess just real quick, if people want to get access to the study, contact you, learn more about RMI's work, whatever it might be, where can they go to learn more and follow up?
You can email me at ytan@rmi.org. My inbox is always open. We are all over the internet. You can just make a search of some of the keywords. I'm sure our work will pop up, but we're always looking for collaboration. We're always looking for, thought partners. I think I saw somebody ask, I don't remember who it was, but like, are we looking for, like university partners or research partners? We're always looking for that. We would love to bridge that gap or make that bridge between, like research and I guess like tertiary level institutional research and make that more accessible to the general public and being used in, policy situations and everything. So reach out, please. I would love to chat and learn more from everybody. I know there's a lot of expertise in this group. So please, my inbox is always open.
Awesome. Yuan, thank you so much for your time. Thanks, as always, to all the great work coming out of Rocky Mountain Institute. And I hope everyone is safe and well, and take care. Thank you so much.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.